Uduasha city, where the sun is a mirror and the moon a shadow. 800 years ago, the gates of death were broken by the Emperor Immortal. The 5 key-bearers, however, had already unlocked them and walked right through. It is in Uduasha city they dwell. Now, the ghost field breathes next to our reality, lit by the eternal flame of the well of Udu. It is a second skin, a place where thought and will struggle against gravity and light. In other places, the dead congregate in the ghost field, but in Uduasha, the well city, the hell city, they fall straight into the flames. See its glittering districts: Kshitijpur, where the rich plot to buy the horizon; Bunda West, where the refugees of 2 different nations flock; and Pasarhandu, the vertical maze of market and murder. And here is Udepat, where the ceaseless temple resides. Its inhabitants, a family, a snake, and a god. The temple has stood since before the gods of this world were forgotten. Watch as it turns the wheels of revolution. Welcome to Desperate Attune, an actual play podcast about people who take risks so they can survive against the odds.
Hi everyone. Welcome back to what is likely to be the last session of A Candle Ablaze, or more correctly, retrospective on the campaign of our first season set in Uduasha of Blades in the Dark by John Harper. John Harper. With me as ever are my players for the last time for me, because I don't mind spoiling to you that I am no longer going to be a GM but a player in the next season. So say hi, Emma.
Hello.
Zoheb.
Hi.
Prince.
Hello.
Aadiyat.
Hello.
You know what? A very normal set of hellos by and large for this episode.
It's a tiny bit of spice from Prince.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. I expect everyone's hellos to be as deranged as possible for the first episode of the next season, just FYI.
Okay, good. Practicing already. So, as you probably know if you're listening to this recording, we wrapped up our campaign last episode. And as a result, any recap that I do now seems a bit silly. Instead, I think what I want to do is, we were discussing doing a retrospective, and there's a really good list of questions that a friend of the show, Laertes, put together. We generally do for other campaigns that we play, and I will just go over what those things are. So, debriefing stuff, as Prince has called it in our channel. I highlighted story arc, highlighted NPCs, highlighted PC development, including your own, highlighted character scenes, best score, and most unexpected twist or turn in the story. And I guess this will be somewhat freewheeling. It's not exactly that we're going to go in this order, and things will come up as they come up. But that's mostly, I think, what I'm thinking. Though I'm willing to recap if someone thinks a recap is appropriate.
Yeah, go ahead. Why not?
Okay. So essentially what happened is that a couple of Skav refugees came to the temple seeking help. The temple decided that the best way to do this was to hold a charity football match. They then met a lawyer in a sauna who told them to go underground. One of the crew ended up eating a god kebab. But I think she really enjoyed that god kebab. Having done that, she realized that she really had a taste for god kebabs, setting up some developments later in the campaign. And another PC realized that the best way to do revolution was a newspaper. The newspaper had several very interesting columns, including an account of Liv growing up in Uduasha as a street urchin, and the best way to make chai. All of this having happened, it turned out that the lawyer actually betrayed them which caused them to feed the lawyer to their own god and then eat their god. I think that's about right.
Wait a minute. Did we feed Hardil to the god?
No, none of what I said happened.
No, well, some of those things happened. You're lying. Didn't you?
Some of them kind of happened. Sorry,
Yeah.
when I said recap, like
What an unreliable narrator. Am I
Yes,
reliable
yeah.
but not?
I thought it was a great recap. You got mostly the vibes of what has happened this campaign. It involved a lot of eating things that are not meant to be eaten and cooking things that are meant to be cooked but badly, from my point of view.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
yeah.
I was genuinely confused. Like, did we feed Hardil to the god? We should have done that. Why didn't we do that?
Yeah, that would have made sense, but too late. So
Let's say that we
so-
did that.
I'm still the GM. And we did not do that. We're not going to do any epilogues, but let me tell you, Hardil made it out of Uduasha safely. I'm making this canon. This is my final act as GM. And then,
Fair
you know, yeah.
using your GM powers to save specifically the crooked lawyer is a power move for sure.
I take your GM and substitute it with one of my own. Prince.
Yeah.
What happened to Hardil?
Got that.
We will find out in season 2 of Desperate Attune.
Yes, great. I will say that Hardil was far from my favorite NPC. Like, he's not even the top 10. But,
So who
you
was
know,
their favorite NPC? It's on the list.
you're right. You know what? You're right. And in fact, normally the GM in these things goes last, but I'm happy to go first. Because in many ways, the GM in our game was mostly just reacting to things, right? So I don't think that, like, me saying things is necessarily giving stuff away or letting you behind the curtain. There is no curtain in our game. So let's kind of go in order. Highlighted story arc. I think for me, something that I really enjoyed was seeing how Zajidan's relationship with Miraz, with Abbas, with Vickers, and with Joan, with everyone in the temple, like, changed mostly in order for us to, like, see it better. I don't think that he changed necessarily, but as we saw more and more of the campaign, we saw more and more, like, the nuances in the ways that he related to things, and the ways that he was making those decisions, which in many ways, like, were quite subtle. I don't think that was necessarily that, like, obvious or anything, but I quite enjoyed watching that happen.
Yeah, I agree.
Definitely. It was a very cool relationship.
Yeah, I also, like, I never brought it up because it didn't seem like it was going to be, like, it was going to matter, but I really thought at some point either or both Miraz's and Vickers' mums were gonna show up in reference, and they just never did.
Mhm.
And, like, we don't even know if they had mums, right? Like, we don't know whether, like, the other person or the people in those relationships were necessarily women or what. We know nothing. Like,
Mhm.
right? And I think that was quite interesting because we focused, especially in Miraz's case, on his dad, and there was, like, a silence about anyone else in that relationship, which almost felt, to me, it felt very natural. I think sometimes you build a relationship where you just don't mention that person at all. You try your best, like, you know that person is there in the relationship, and just never address that person.
We talked a little bit about Miraz's mother out of character, largely in the
Yes.
context of, like, why she's not a character, why she's not part of the narrative at all. And, like, I think to an extent, it's kind of like sometimes, look, it's like, I don't know, my grandparents, for example, like my grandmother, like, I vaguely remember her, but, like, she died when I was, like, really young, and I remember her death, but, like, I don't remember anything else about her. And, like, I don't think that, like, diminishes who she is as a person or something, but, like, I have no memory of her whatsoever. And of course, like,
Yeah.
Miraz's mother would obviously figure, because, you know, mother would figure more closely into his life. But if she passed away for whatever reason when he was super young, again, like, not really important as such. Life goes on, right?
Yeah.
I think that was interesting. And I think it also avoids, like, because I think, like, in this sort of, like, fiction, when there's, like, that gap in someone's life, like, you know, losing a parent really, really early, it tends to define them really explicitly in a lot of ways. And sometimes I think that's it's a little bit not played out as such. I think it's always, like, good to explore that. But there are other ways of like relating to that sort of like loss.
No, I definitely agree with that. I mean, and that was something that I like definitely was aware of, in that I never felt like we were missing out by not seeing it. But it struck me as interesting because I think we also spoke out of character, maybe even not in a recording, about the fact that both Miraz and Vickers seemed not to have, like, they were both the children of single fathers when we meet them on screen.
Yep.
Mm.
As for Vickers, the explanation for why her mother never turned up in the campaign is, I think, that she's still in Doskvol. Like,
Oh, is she alive? Oh, interesting.
I don't think it was ever established that Vickers' mother is dead.
No, it wasn't.
No, but she is not together with their father anymore, and so why would she move all the way across the world? That's yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I didn't clarify precisely what happened to her. There was implied that, you know, something went horribly wrong at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But it may just have been as simple as like a divorce, or it may have been worse because it's Doskvol. But you know, she just isn't in Uduasha. that was just.
I mean, to be honest, I think that the relationship between Vickers and I mean, I can call her Liz now because I'm no longer zealously representing the world to some extent, could also very much just be like the result of like a somewhat messy divorce that, you know, didn't get addressed in the best possible way, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It could really be that simple.
I think it's also an outcome of the fact that we didn't actually see the Ashcrofts very much.
No.
We saw more of them in the early season.
Mhm.
The early season, but like not so much after a point, which I think was fairly natural. We focused on what was interesting to us. But I'd be quite interested in actually seeing if the Ashcrofts like re-emerge in season 2. We don't need to push for that direction, but it'd be an interesting opportunity, perhaps, to like see more of that family.
Yeah, maybe.
I think what we discovered kind of was that their story, if it continues, is a kind of story that takes place over a much longer time. Yeah, can be kind of a meta thing.
Yeah, we did establish a bit about Joan's parents very early on, and it was basically like Abbas met her and was like, "Oh, how's my cousin doing?" And Joan was like, "Yeah, he's dead."
Oh yeah.
You're like, you were not actually a cousin. You were like a second cousin. So you were the child of Abbas's cousin. I think we established, and then you were just like, "Yeah, he died a while ago. Now I'm here."
Yeah. I mean, what was also interesting was that so whenever Abbas and Ajidan were speaking, and like they were brothers, even in that relationship, Miraz's mother wasn't necessarily addressed, right? Like, for example, in my life, I can't imagine now if my brother-in-law ever passed away, and presumably in the fullness of time he's going to, but I hope that he won't for a long time. Hi, Alex, if you're listening to this, why would you be? He would figure heavily when we talk, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that like he would come up in casual conversation. I don't know, right? So I think that did make sense, even from like the point of view of other people who've known Zajidan not as a father, but more as a contemporary.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I really like. I found playing Zajidan very rewarding, and I think that he taught me a bit. I think about like parenting in a weird way, in that like he was much more happy-go-lucky in a sense than any parent I have ever known. He was very much like, you can do it, and then he would just hang out, right? Until, let's be honest, he planned to sacrifice himself to his god so the snake could wear his skin, and then he blew out a candle and also his own soul. But before that, he was pretty happy-go-lucky, so I quite enjoyed him.
Like, I don't mind spoiling that he is my highlighted NPC for very obvious reasons, I think. Yeah, I mean, of course.
Well, that's nice.
No, I mean, no, it was like, it felt very real, is the thing. Like, it felt very real and natural. And like, I think it's always difficult to do, like, especially for me, like, I tend to have a bit of a distance in role-playing. Like, I think I'm a good player, but like, there are certain things, like the fairly, like, intimate relationships where I struggle a little bit. And I think an outcome of the fact that is that I've spoken about this out of the recording and so on, but like I would have liked in retrospect to have like been more free to interact with Vickers, like on a romantic level and so on, like, you know, found that. And I think like there was largely a little bit of my own distancing there. But I think for whatever reason, the Zajidan relationship, the Mira's Zajidan relationship was very free and open. And I found that really, really, really refreshing and like very easy to go. So I think, yeah, I have to highlight that for sure. Especially like the final scene with Miraz and Zajidan, which, you know, it's in retrospect, that's a very hard scene, but to actually play it out, it felt very easy. I think that says a lot.
Yeah, I think actually I was drawing a lot from the game that you and I were playing before this campaign, in which I also played a dad.
Yeah.
And the NPC was played by the GM, Laertes again, and that it was the same kind of refreshing relationship that I really liked, which I wanted to try and replicate, which was much like the someone whose parent dies early and that ends up defining them is like such a big trope. The same thing of like, I have a complicated relationship to my parents is also such a big trope in a way where often it's like, oh, here are all of the things that make this tough, right? Whereas I think that like with Zajidan, I knew that I wanted it to be easy. And that like whatever problems came up, I knew I wanted to be like, both he and the other person that he's having problems with should be able to like have that conversation. And I think that actually ended up making it like feel better not better, but it ended up like feeling more impactful when Zajidan ended up being like, you know what, this is all going to shit, right? Like I need to do something about this, and I'm not going to talk to anyone before I do that. Because like it was represented such a radical change from that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask Aadiyat about his feeling about Zajidan and like how he thought about Aadiyat, Abbas and Zajidan interacting.
Yeah, I was gonna highlight Zajidan as one of my favorite NPCs as well, and I think so there was some it did I don't have an older brother and all my older cousins live abroad, but even then I felt like, you know, when Abbas and Zajidan were talking, it felt natural, and I really liked it, like on a personal level, because like the dynamic kind of reminded me of my dad and his older brother. So, yeah, I enjoyed that as well. And I did like the kind of thing where, like, even though Zajidan's the older brother, and culturally, he has the authority. They're I think, and Abbas does also kind of defer to him. I think there was a little bit of tension in, you know, not necessarily tension. I guess there was some them trying to implicitly sort of figure out where their authority is, because especially with the scene where Zajidan wanted to shed his skin.
Yeah.
And it was actually Abbas lecturing him about, being reckless.
Yeah, for sure.
I like these little nuances. I like these little moments. It felt very natural, and yeah.
I'm glad to hear that, to be honest. I was very much drawing on my own experience of a range of family, but also not just positively in terms of this is how it is, but also negatively in terms of this is how I don't want it to be, right?
Yeah. To elaborate more on that thing, what I was saying, where Zajidan is the older brother, and so is technically the higher up, right? But that most of the day-to-day stuff is done by Abbas, and Zajidan is essentially retired, and but even though it didn't seem all that interested, or that involved in the politics, or the or until he was shedding his skin, or even the spiritual aspects, the day-to-day running of the temple. And that part is exactly like my dad and his brother, where nominally my dad, being the younger brother, is like defers to his older brother, but my dad actually takes care of most of the things in the family. So
Right.
there's this thing where he must, in a very respectful way, tell my uncle like what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like you got to figure out how you're going to negotiate that in a way that doesn't hurt anybody's feelings, or like not exactly hurt anybody's feelings, but you know what I mean. But also get the work done.
Yeah. So I like that. I like that a lot.
I definitely get the impression that Zajidan was probably the most emotionally challenging NPC to play. I don't know if that's true, Tree.
I don't think so. I actually think that the most emotionally challenging NPC, it's a good question. It's probably tied between the esteemed lady, whom I found tricky because it was that balance of I care a lot about Freya, but I am so used to never like letting my guard down that it's not so easy for me to like express this openly, right? And like, but at the same time, she is a performer, so she knows how important it is to perform correctly, right? I definitely found that like interesting. I think the other NPC that I found like emotionally tricky, even though he was on screen for all of like 5 minutes, was Munna. Because how do you portray this man? You know, like what is going on here? What is the way in which you can be this hyper competent person, right? And I'm not sure I ever really figured that out. But then I was like, well, we don't need to necessarily ever see him on screen, so it's fine. And then he was on screen just for that one extra. But in some ways, I actually like playing emotionally challenging characters is easier for me in that I have a better idea of like how they might feel. What's much tricky is playing characters who don't care as much as they should, because then I have no way of trying to figure out like what does I don't give a shit look like, and the fact is that I'm not exactly sure what it looks like. So that I find a bit more tricky, I think. I think then I'm happy to move to the next question on my list. And then when we come to your questions, Zoheb, we can be like, well, we want answered this one or whatever. Right. But for lack of a structure, I think.
Yeah.
So highlighted NPCs, and we've talked about a few of them. But for me, someone that I enjoyed being a lot was Goopy. I think that Goopy was someone who had a lot of interiority, hidden behind the panchuing, behind the being a goon, right? And like the interiority was not of a high quality in that he wasn't a poet, right? He wasn't like coming out here. Even that article that he wrote, I think we described it as it's very much purple prose, doesn't do everything that it needs to, all this stuff, but he was very genuine in that way. And like he had a best friend. It's always nice to just have a best friend who goes everywhere you go, right? And I think like I enjoyed both of them because they had that relationship of I'm always here for you, and yet separating them and making making Goopy a bit more introspective and making Baga a bit more like I don't care that much about the stuff, whatever. That was also super fun for me. And I think that like I wouldn't say that I enjoyed her, but actually now that I think about it, just because Goopy's on the brain, I think Elizabeth was tricky for me. And I think the reason Elizabeth was tricky for me was she didn't have a best friend, literally. She wanted one and she never got one. And I think that was a key thing in her personality, right? That she was looking for someone to ground her. I think subconsciously she probably thought Vickers should have been that person, and Vickers wasn't that person. But that doesn't that's not necessarily because it has to be Vickers' job or whatever, right? But that was something I definitely found challenging to try and figure out, where that balance for Elizabeth was. And I quite liked her.
Yeah.
But I liked her because she was a douche canoe in a very real way. She's just treated Vidas not very well, treated Vickers not very well, tried and failed at a bunch of things instead of just asking for help, right? She was just she was kind of like a disaster waiting to happen, and then she just kept happening. So, But yeah, Prince, I'm actually curious. In terms of those siblings, while we were earlier talking about Zajidan and Abbas, it really did feel like Vickers and Elizabeth had a very different feeling, right? They had a very different relationship.
Oh yeah, for sure. Something I wanted the Ashcrofts to feel like was that, the Chakrabortis are not a perfect family. They are a family with a lot of complicated feelings going around. But the Ashcrofts are, well, they're just a very unhappy family, right? Vickers and her dad didn't have an antagonistic relationship, but they didn't have a particularly good one either. And she had an outright antagonistic relationship with her sister. And as we've touched on, her mother wasn't even part of the story. And I wanted to portray a little bit that Vickers is kind of really trying to be a good person, but she also comes from a background of she comes from a background of proper nobility, of pretty fucked up proper nobility, where expectations and face matter more than anything else. And Vickers rebelled against that. She played roofball, married the wrong guy, just generally didn't live up to her parents' expectations at all. And so that was part of it. I think I wanted her to come from a family that just didn't work. And I think fundamentally that was her relationship with Elizabeth, right? Ultimately, Elizabeth and Vickers would be happier if they didn't even know each other, but they're sisters, so they do.
Yeah.
It was that sort of family. Yeah.
And that's a very specific kind of unhappiness, I think, because it also comes from knowing what you could have had, but you don't have it. And that's quite tough.
So I thought that was portrayed very well, and Vickers still, they still care about each other, but it's
not necessarily in a healthy way.
No, not necessarily in a healthy way. No, exactly. Where both kind of think that they know what's better for the other person. Vickers was guilty of this too. She did things for Elizabeth's own good, in quotes, which Elizabeth would have totally disapproved of, and this went both ways. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think those were my two. I wouldn't say Elizabeth was not exactly a highlight, but Elizabeth was definitely a person that was I spent a lot of time thinking about her. And as the season developed, we didn't see as much of her. I really wanted V to be someone at some point. And again, kind of veered away from that. We started exploring Munna instead as the criminal person, which again, I enjoyed. But I spent a lot of time thinking about Elizabeth. What ways was she let down? What ways did she, all that kind of thing. So I definitely if I can make a request for someone who I think should show up, I think it might be Elizabeth actually that I want to show up.
Okay.
So
yeah, interesting. As for me, I think the NPCs I would like to highlight are Elizabeth was interesting, but I think it was really cool how you played the lady in Shades of Rose and Gold. Just because I invented that. It was interesting because I invented that character. This isn't on the podcast. This was when we were making preparations for it. And then Klow is the person who actually picked that character up and ran with it. And then you put her... And it's always cool seeing a character get through these iterations because the end result was so different from how I had imagined her when I just wrote down the description of this person that lives in Ashcloister. So that was very cool to see. And then, of course, my other highlighted NPC is obviously Augustus Khan.
Of course.
I may have invented the name, but Tree, you took the name and made it into a legend.
He was the creme de la creme.
Yes.
Hello, Augustus Khan. I won't lie. I turned my shit posting brain, such as it is, all the way up for that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like there was no doubt. But I think that something else that also happened was because you rolled so well in so many ways, I had to commit. Like whenever you tried and made that relationship work for you, it was like, okay, now I have to know that this is something that is working. And as a result, the French accent or the commitment to making Roofball work, all of this stuff was really, I think, something that I found he needed to buy in, and that was necessarily true. And therefore, we found ourselves in that place where he became this person.
Yeah. What was funny about Augustus Khan too is that he's so ridiculous and over the top that no one would think he's real, but he wasn't real. He's just a fake persona. So it really worked. Like this is a character being portrayed by a bad actor in universe. So the bad accent is diegetic. It's
he's literally an Indian trying to be French.
Yep.
So it's great.
Yeah, I'm glad I came up with such an ostentatious name.
Gotta say though that also, again, in terms of interiority, his transformation over the campaign was really interesting. From what I feel like was starting as a comic relief character, then becoming slightly less comic relief and more honest halfway through, and then going back into a different comic relief character.
Comic relief? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's true. What was your highlighted NPC, Emma? I'm curious.
I really enjoyed the creeping cruelty of Madison Frake.
Yes, absolutely.
Speaking as her very slowly digested and savored appetizer.
I mean, genuinely, what a person. What can you possibly say about Madison Frake?
Did I mention that this was my former PC as well?
I think you did, even on screen.
Okay. Well, yeah. I preferred the way you played her, to be honest.
Well, I think that she probably changed between you and me anyway. Something that I really enjoyed was listening back to... So when I was playing Madison the second time, I wasn't sure whether they were she, they, she, her, he, him, what, right? I was just not sure. And then we just all concluded, it's fine. They could have gone through a change. But it turned out I had the same instinct both times, which is both times I went, Madison sounds like a she, her, she, they, them. I'm just going to use both. So it was funny to me to listen back to that recording and realize that I had just been doing the same thing again. The same set of thoughts. Oh, cannibal? Weirdo? No way this person is binary. I'm sorry, to all of the binary people out there, this person is just... Their gender is cannibal.
You can't claim this one.
Legit.
This one's for the queers.
I just want to say that I do not share Tree's opinions on this.
Oh, yeah, see, already getting pushback. The second that one of us expresses an opinion, we just eat each other up. It's terrible.
It's almost eat each other up. It's a very good choice of words there.
Yes, indeed. I'm glad you noticed. But nonetheless, yes, I really enjoyed Madison Frake. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. Also highlighted the PC for me. I mean, you have so many performances that, of course, it's cheating to say more than one, and hopefully there should be more spread. Yeah, you do a good job.
I mean, it's nice of you to say. I think, to be honest, the time that it became most obvious to me that I had, because for me, it's all in the cadence. Rather, I can do two different accents, right? And they're both really mine. But what did, I think, demonstrate it is that the first time, and by the time this goes out, you'll have edited the poem into the finale, right?
Yes, sir.
The first time I read it out somewhat as myself, somewhat as Zajidan, but kind of very in a very like subconscious way, right? And then when we were talking about it, and I was like, oh, and you said, Zoheb, that I should do it explicitly as him. I was like, okay, what's his voice like? And he like the recording immediately changed, right? So even though like in accent and that kind of thing, it was the same, if you hear the two recordings, they're actually like wildly different because Zajidan's just approaching the same text in such a different way. And that I think was startling even to me. I didn't expect that, right? And we got to this point where some of the things that last line, when I read it, I got more and more breathless as I was reading it because it felt to me like it was a poem heading towards a conclusion that, I didn't even want to get to. Whereas for Zajidan, it was a conclusion about this is how life is, This is just how it goes. And so his reading was much more like not just somber, but like calm and like collected in that way. And then I heard it back and I was like, oh wow, this is just wild how different these two like views that are technically inside myself are, right?
Yeah. That was very cool.
Okay, so you know what we should do? We should first ask Aadiyat what his highlighted NPCs are, and then we can all do story arcs instead of one person doing all of them at once, which doesn't make as much sense. So yes, Aadiyat, please tell us.
Well, I've already spoken about one of them, which is Zalijan, and for the reasons stated above. And the other one, I mean, also has been mentioned, and how can it not be Augustus Khan? Like, everything about this guy, from being like a thorn in the side for the temple, being...
I like how his name isn't even Morrison anymore.
It's not more
No, it's not.
No,
Really?
hey, don't dead name him.
Yeah, don't you dare do that.
Don't you dare do that. To his downfall, where we found him in what's it called?
Ash Cluster, I think.
No,
like just like was it Ash Cluster? Oh, we might have been Gilly. Yeah.
Yeah, Gilly, and I also just love the idea of Abbas going up to this down, just a criminal at rock bottom and bringing him into the fold. The way that Vickers then took him in. Gave him a new identity, and then Tree playing the reborn Augustus Khan was just amazing. Like every word that came out of this man's mouth was just fantastic. Like,
indeed.
Yeah.
We should also highlight Prince's ridiculous idea to create Augustus Khan from the ashes of Morrison.
I mean, how long was the clock, Prince, to reinvent Morrison? Was it 8? Was it 10?
Yeah, I think so. It was called The Redemption of One Augustus Khan.
Yes, that's what it was called.
The clock.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, naming the clock that did a lot to motivate me to make sure that he changed completely, right? Like, once you redeem him, how can he possibly be who he was anymore? He's a new person.
Yes, I'm glad I came up with it. It literally was me realizing, like, oh yes, Vickers would have to give this guy a name. I forgot about that, but then that was kind of diegetic because Vickers would also forget about that.
Yeah.
Just, okay, what are the two most overblown names I can give this guy? Augustus Khan.
Yes, correct.
I was going to say, I was so obsessed with that I seriously considered making him my alternate PC.
Yeah.
Wow.
While we're talking about the name Augustus Khan, like I love the idea that this guy, or wait, are we saying that he came up with his own new name, or Vickers gave him that name?
No, Vickers gave it to him.
Vickers came up with it on the spot. She was introducing him, and that's when I, as a player, realized, like, all right, he needs a name, and I just decided that Vickers would think the exact same way.
Augustus Khan. Yeah, I just like the idea of the name that you come up with an alternate name, like, oh, he's French now, so it's Augustus, and then you just default back to being Iruvian. Oh, Khan. Whoops.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I do think that Augustus was someone that whenever he came on screen, I was like, shit, I have to do this accent again. And then in order to make myself enjoy it, I was like, it's gonna be Fulham. You know. Like,
what do you mean shit? I have to do this accent again. It should be yes, I get to do this accent again.
look, when we
Love
get
it.
cancelled on French Twitter, I'm gonna point to you.
Yes.
That's all I'm saying. Um,
Well, as I said, it's diegetic. He's meant to be
Yes.
bad at being French. It's fine.
Listen,
Yeah.
where I live, the French will never come. They will
Uh-huh.
never put up with this cuisine.
Uh-huh.
Oh no! To be clear, you live in the is it technically inside the Arctic Circle?
It is in the Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's I mean, like it's a different it's a different planet essentially. So you know.
Yeah.
Should we move on to story arcs?
Yes, I think so.
Highlighted story arc. Yes, I remember. It was the Kingfisher situation, particularly how we have Freya mentioned first, and then kind of like as this like what seemed at the time like it was going to be a villain or a very big fish that we had to work around, then having her show up being completely different in some way than I imagined, but very like still having this kind of royal. I thought that was a very cool description of like somebody who is very honestly and belongingly royal, and then having that arc over to her losing all of that, and almost as a midway cold open twist, suddenly being one of the player characters. There was a character who had been in the background for a long time, suddenly becoming a main character in the middle of the show. I really like that.
Yeah, that was a fun decision to make.
Yeah, I think it was a good decision as well because it gave us like someone very different, but still connected to the crew, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that was really cool.
And the viewers have to appreciate the fact that it was a very small twist of fate that the situation just aligned itself such that it must be Freya as the second PC. And if that hadn't happened, they would have gotten Augustus Khan instead.
Indeed.
So it is.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. You've broken my brain. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
New story arc, favorite story arc, Zoheb deciding to play Freya and not Augustus Khan. Excellent. Very good.
Mm-hmm. A meta story.
A meta story arc. Yeah. The true character development was inside us all along.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the true character development being inside us, I want to highlight the Shrine Builder. I really loved how the Shrine Builder went from like a cool twist in the Kingfisher Grotto to being like an underlying menace for some time, where we had a lot of like foreshadowing that like Miraz is screwed up right now, to then becoming like a relationship problem between Vickers and Miraz, and then how that resolved. It was like basically there's like a grand supernatural problem, and once Vickers realizes that there's a grand supernatural problem threatening her husband, the campaign ends. I thought that was it was fun. It was a fun arc to me, and I loved how you played the Shrine Builder, Klow. So
yeah, thank you.
I got so pissed off with that guy.
Which is what he deserves.
I thought I was very interested in that actually, because like this kind of like fairly like I have a few sort of like archetypes, but like this kind of like cold, quite cruel, heartless kind of character is also like one of the things in my wheelhouse. It was interesting to kind of like switch from Mirrors to that, because I think in a certain way like that's what I tend to play more. So I was kind of like just being like, oh, this is just what most of my PCs would react as, cold contempt, hating all of you. And I just realized, oh my god, this is so inappropriate in the context of this campaign.
Yes.
Which is cool.
Yeah. I thought it was a cool arc, and it gave us kind of, from my perspective anyway, it gave us the campaign villain. It was like, once Vickers realized that this like threat from the past, this like actual manifestation of generational trauma is here, I'm like, I'm gonna kill it. I'm going to kill this thing. So for me, that was very fun, and it gave us some room to actually explore Vickers and Mirasa's relationship, which, you know, there weren't so many scenes between them early on, so it was nice to do that.
Yeah, I think it was a good relationship. I just wish I could have done a bit more with it.
It was good. It was good.
Yeah. Always good to want a little more.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Since we're doing story arcs, I don't think I've said mine.
No, go for it.
Yeah. So I think I'll shout out Joan for this, like, just in general, because I think, like, she was a really interesting character in the sense that she was literally a little bit of a sort of like outlier, sometimes a little bit hard to really figure out what's going on. And I felt, I mean, I don't know, Emma, like, how much you had like already planned, or how much of it was like stuff you'd been thinking in the background and so on, or how much of it was just like taking the moment and kind of like deciding right there. But it was really interesting to kind of like, because like the outcome of it is kind of like she's in the background and we don't really know that much about what's going on with her until suddenly we focus on her and she does something like really, really interesting that like transforms herself, like, of course, also a little bit literally. And I think like she went the most places, really. And I think that was a really, really interesting character arc.
Yeah, it was a very transforming character. I think it was also like in the beginning I was searching a lot with who this actually was, and I think her disconnectedness from the rest of the family kind of contributed to that. But I'm really glad that it went somewhere interesting in the end.
Yeah.
I have to say that I think that session that we did, with Joan, where it was just you and me, and we were talking about what kinds of like things motivated Joan and what kinds of things were motivating this really unhinged character in the most unhinged way. That was like some of the best fun I've ever had, like role playing period, right? Yeah, it was such a great like a combination of genuine politics and also absolute weirdness. Yeah, that was great.
I really have to highlight that entire scene. Like, it was amazing. Like, despite my technical complaints, which were many, it was amazing.
Yes, it is.
Totally fair.
I really have to stress that it was really fucking good.
Well, it's yeah. I'm not afraid to say that Emma and I did have a conversation along the lines of, "Oh shit, did we fuck up? Oh shit, oh shit." So you know.
Oh well, it produced good stuff, which I guess by the time we release this, they will have listened to already.
Yes, exactly. Also, all that ends well. Aadiyat, what do you think your favorite story arc is?
I think my favorite story arc was more, I guess, the wider arc, which was our dealings with the Eternal One.
By the way, an incredibly fun NPC to play. Oh my god. Like, when do you get to just be a total douche canoe? Oh, I loved it so much. Sorry, please go on.
Yes, your excitement encourages me further.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, I like that at first. You know, we established the Eternal One as like the authority figure in this temple, and then we slowly started to chip away at that bit by bit. That actually, you know, we shouldn't be relying on and then, or listening to, or caring about, and then this thing, and then we went straight to, oh yeah, we're just going to like destroy this. Yeah, it's not a murder. Like, and like it happened over the entire campaign, but every time it came up, I think like the story progressed in a natural and satisfying way.
Yeah, I think that like one of the things for me is that like I'm quite Sufi in the way that I think about a lot of this, and I just really enjoyed the way that we went from orthodoxy to heresy, and I enjoyed how Abbas went from orthodoxy to heresy. I think that was great. And like heresy in a way which like has a lot of respect and love for the original. Yeah. Right? Like it's very important that like it's not heresy in the way that, for example, like sometimes atheists see it, which is, you know, oh haha, I'm like disrespecting the thing that you love because it has had so many people. like that could be a legitimate form of like political expression. I'm not like you do you, you know, like for me it was more Abbas loves the religion and it provides this foundation for him, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Abbas is willing to let the trappings of the religion kind of like prevent it from being the best possible version that it can be.
Yeah.
And something that like I enjoy a lot is there is a Sufi poem which kind of like roughly translated like there's a very famous Persian romantic couple called Majnu and Layla who you know, it's the classic, you know, like one is a prince from one side, one's the princess from the other side, that kind of thing. And the poem in translation basically says, you know, someone goes to Majnu and says, you know, you are being called by Allah. And Majnu says something very odd. He says, you fool, why should I go to see God? If God wishes to see me, he should come in Layla's form. Right? And it's a very like kind of it's a sentiment about why should I bow or like compromise in my vision because I know what divinity is for me, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's very much like where I was saying the inspiration for a lot of this from, in that I ended up playing the snake very much as like condescending and like knowing better than that kind of thing. And so long as nobody challenged it, it was actually fine. But the second someone started pushing back in a real way, it was like, who the hell do you think you are, right?
Yeah.
I think there was a very good piece of character consistency in the way that the mix of respect and radicalness was kind of a theme for Abbas. Because, like, as you've said, it's like how he... It's how his heresy started or how it worked. But it also seems to me that Abbas's love of the city, and while also having been an insurrectionist or a rebel or a firebrand, has that kind of mirrors it.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what like I don't have a very clear motive. Like, I mean, the thing about what Tree was saying about Abbas loving religion but also not letting the trappings get in the way of what it can be, that comes from a personal thing. But I also didn't want Abbas to just be me, so I made him a bit more, I think, also like a kind of character where I'll say try to, where his motivations aren't all that clear, because I think there was a part of him, or I tried to play up that, you know, if he's challenging the authority of the snake, it's not just like strictly on a philosophical level, but also because he doesn't want to be questioned. Like Abbas doesn't want to be questioned. He wants to be correct and will go as far as to start an insurrection against his own god to be the person who's right.
I don't know if anyone else like felt this, but I was thinking about Abbas's arc, and it felt kind of like if anyone was like looking at Abbas from the outside, they would just assume like, you know, nothing's changed. He's still the same guy. Okay, he's done a few different things, but it's like still the same essential person. But some very subtle but important changes happened inside him, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think I had to struggle a little bit with trying to play a guy who is like, I mean, the story obviously, you know, you want to push this character forward, but the character doesn't know that he's in a story, and he will, you know, and I made him up to be a very sort of weird mix of being both like conservative and progressive. Like when he's progressive when like it's something he wants to do, then he'll do anything. It doesn't matter. But so yeah, I don't know if that like came through in that way, but I think it makes sense that like on the outside it looks like, you know, he's pretty much the same guy, but on the inside there are some like changes in his thinking. I expect that. Like I want Abbas to be the person who has a very like he can rewire his brain a little bit to justify what he's doing.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting. I think like you modeled him after like the kind of like archetypical South Asian uncle, right? And I think I think like everyone can kind of relate to this globally. Like parents' generations tend to be more conservative, like older generations tend to be a bit more conservative. But we always like think about, like can we make incremental little bit changes? Can we like, oh, this thing that you said is a little bit homophobic or something, or like that's a bit racist, Dad. And I'm not saying like it maps on exactly to that, but it's nice to kind of like role play a little bit of like still conservative, like essentially like nothing is not like massively changed, but like subtle but important changes have happened.
Yeah.
I thought that was nice.
Yeah, and I think that like it's also that like no stereotype is ever true in a single person, right? Like so in this case, we know that like actually Abbas is an uncle now. He was legit a revolutionary before, right?
Yeah.
And as a result, the fact that we can see how those two things kind of interact, that's what really suggests like that he's not a typical uncle, because there's no person that exemplifies that stereotype, even though sometimes I do think some people in my life exemplify that stereotype.
Of course, I think it's a bit different for Aadiyat and I, because like our parents' generations are basically, well, most of them are revolutionaries, I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Which is funny to think about.
Mm.
All right, how are we doing with these questions?
We could maybe just do highlighted score. I think highlighted character scene is something we have kind of already touched
done.
on.
Yeah, let's do highlighted score as well. That's a good idea.
Sure.
Yeah. How about Prince, since you're talking, you pick it up.
Okay, highlighted score. For me, it's easy. Just like the score that I had the most fun with, it's obviously the roof ball match.
Nice. Yeah.
I really enjoyed stealing the hang glider, and there was so much going on in that score too. Like we had Miraz being the high priest, we had Joan making some sort of deal with the snake, we have Abbas deciding to play roofball and then switching sides. It was a great score where like all four of our characters were doing completely unrelated things, but it somehow tied together really well anyway. So I really had fun with that.
Yeah. I think listeners who, I mean, the listeners that I've like heard speak about it, like they've all considered that they've been kind of describing that score as like really iconic in terms of like getting the vibe for the campaign, the Chakravarti is what we're all about, and it's a pretty cool score.
Yeah, it was, and it was cool to actually play Ruthball. It was teased so much, so
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'd actually like to see a bit more Ruthball. We'll see if there's room for that in season 2. Let's see. My highlighted score would actually be the Home Alone score, where we got assaulted by the rising moon, which of course, might lead us a little bit into talking about season 2. We'll see, but that's not the main reason I like it so much. I like it because from a technical perspective, like it kind of reverses the usual like score structure. Like we get engagement rolled upon, so that was interesting to kind of like mess with to kind of like show the viewers like you can do this in Blades, it works perfectly well, and it produces good results. And I think the score itself was like super interesting, like really impactful, like the first death, and they just set us up for certain aspects of the end game, but also like very tight, very cohesive. We all knew what was going on. Never a case of like, oh, what's this about, what are we really supposed to do? It's clear what we have to do. We have to get rid of these people who are attacking us. So really good.
I want to shout out anybody who, because I know we cut a lot of this out of the edited session, but so just that day or maybe a day earlier, I had been to a book launch about a very iconic Indian actor called Aadiyat, who is from Hyderabad. As a young man, he was a hero. He's very good looking, and then he later reinvented himself as a villain. And there is someone called Ajit in Ramu's gang. And in my head, it was definitely Ajit the Line. So, just for anyone who cares to like pick that up, even Mona like Ajit has like this side piece called Mona, and Mona's like the person who tees up the ridiculous quotes, and then Ajit knocks them down, right? So
Ajit was basically entirely deleted from the session.
Yes, correct.
Also literally in fiction as well.
Wow.
Mm.
Well, I think it's possible we will see Mona Dadling in season 2, though. I think she's someone
Yeah.
who's very
Let's
likely
see.
to make an appearance for one reason or another.
Let's see. Tree, what is your favorite score?
Oh man, I've kind of. There were so many good ones. I think my favorite score is. I'm going to be very cliche about this. I think it's the last one.
Uh-huh.
I think that there was a lot going on, but we knew what was going on. I was always a little disappointed that I kept forgetting to bring Johannes and Maud back. And I kept thinking, but the injury that Johannes suffered was so much more grievous, and they don't have the advantage that Miraz has of A, being a PC, and B, having a literal shrine builder inside them. And so it must take much longer for them to recover, right? But I'm glad that they came back and they appeared in that final scene when it mattered. When you would I wanted it to bookend the season, right?
Yeah.
And that really felt good to me. The scene with Zajudan at the end, Zajudan and Zal, felt really good to me. The scene with Constable, where who were the PCs? You know what I mean? Constable was an NPC. I was playing the other NPC who was the person who was and it was a scene that a PC should have been in, but it wasn't. And I'm gonna just pat myself on the back and say I handled that fairly well. So
You did.
even outside the really incredible moments of Vickers attacking the snake, Joan turning up, Miraz, actively going against the Empire, and Abbas basically nearly murdering this poor woman, right? All of those moments were really iconic. But even outside of that, there were loads of really small things that I think worked really well in that score, because we were all we knew the vision in a way, and then we were just doing it. So that's I think that's it for me.
I'll briefly comment. So because of the way things played out, I had Miraz completely ignore Constable, Maud, and Johannes. But I had, as soon as you said Maud and Johannes were back, I had it lined up that Miraz's new name for Johannes was going to be Wolfgang, and I was waiting for an opportunity
to say
to
Wolfgang.
Yeah, but then my dad died,
no.
and I have better things to do.
Yeah, very fair. Very fair.
Yeah.
Oh man. Maybe I should put Wolfgang in my next. Yeah. Okay. Good. Good to know. Good to know. Great. But yeah, that was my favorite score.
Emma hasn't said hers yet.
Well, I've highlighted the Kingfisher arc, and I think also the Kingfisher score was the one that sticks in my memory the most. As oh, that was really cool. In parts, I think it was going into the was it mines? It was something else.
It was the caverns. It was spelunking.
The caverns, yeah. In some ways, it was it started out as what would have been the most traditional score, I think, if you just look at the outline of it. But so many funny and amazing and unexpected things happened, like Abbas using his clothing as a parachute. I have to reiterate that is a thing that happened. And it was a beautiful turning point as well, or what turned out to be very impactful, as it was the moment where we lost the support of the snake.
Yeah. It's a very solid mid-season turn in that way. It took the campaign in a whole other direction.
Yeah. I think that was going to be my other score that I was going to mention. But the reason that the finale edged it out is that I got to play an old PC of mine, and I have a very soft spot for him. So I was just I got to pick it.
Yeah. I did feel a little bit self-conscious about Constable suddenly becoming so important because, former PC and all that. But I think of course, I really, on a personal level, I really appreciated the way things went down with that, of course.
Yeah.
And I hope it also made good listening. I think it did.
I think it did. But I think one of the reasons that it did was that we knew that even though we cared about her, she wasn't as important to the campaign as the PCs were, right? Like the reason we're focusing on her is because Miraz is explicitly wanting for her to live so that we don't all get like murderized by the inspectors, right?
Yeah. And I think
that was a useful thing to keep in mind. Sorry, go on.
I think also like even in the context of the campaign, and again, like I don't know how it'll feel for the listeners and so on, it was nice that this story about revolution, but like not in a fairly atypical sort of way, very like I guess cerebral, I guess we could say.
Mm-hmm.
We had like inspector, this like foreign cop, and of course like she was not a good presence.
Yeah.
But there was still room for compassion and humanity and so on. And I think that's something I really appreciate because I can really see a very different kind of like typical sort of like arc for how that person gets dealt with.
Yeah. I think you're right that she was someone that like it would have been very reasonable for any player to just go, hey, I want to like shoot her and then chuck her in the river and then make sure that nobody notices.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we did make conscious decisions not to let that happen, which I think was like important in many ways.
Yeah. Pragmatic, but also I liked how it played out on an emotive level.
Yeah.
All right.
Aadiyat, you're left with highlighted score.
Yes, I was also going to the spelunking score in the Kingfisher Grotto because I think it had everything. Like all the characters had like really cool moments with like from the beginning to the end, like where we were trying to cross that chasm, and then like Vickers using her like self as like an anchor point from which Joan jumped off to the other side of the chasm.
Yeah.
I mean, like somehow it worked. And then like I think this was one of the first times in this campaign where Abbas and Miraz kind of actually got along.
Yeah,
which was nice for my character. With ingenious use of binding oil. Sorry, binding oil was what? Floating oil. What was it?
Drift oil.
Drift oil, I think.
Drift oil, yeah. That's the one, yeah. And then like when we went to the Kingfisher Grotto again, I think that the finale of that score set us along the path for the rest of the campaign, right? With the shrine builder and like Abbas getting a bit like drunk on his own power with the ritual and trying to like say that he's back now, he's gonna do things, he's no longer a bookish old man. Joan eating a god.
I mean, yes, yeah.
I mean, so yeah, like for me, that's a standout score by far, I think.
Yeah.
I also do want to shout out that we had a whole Lord Skurlock score. It didn't make the top 5, right? And it was a very good score, and it didn't make the top 5. So we ran a good campaign, guys. I'm proud of it.
Yeah, it was good. It was a good time.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, but I will not deny that I also will enjoy no longer being GM, because I think that players get away with so much nonsense, and I look forward to getting away with so much nonsense. It's gonna happen. It's gonna be the year of me doing absolute like unhinged shit. It's gonna like you think you've seen stuff from Joan? I'm gonna make it my personal mission to outdo Joan.
You said you were going to make a god?
Yes, correct. Teaser, but also, you can know this. I would have said it in episode 1 anyway. Very much inspired by the Silt Verses, very much inspired by Max Gladstone's craft sequence, but also very much inspired by Joan. I'm gonna commit to this. I'm gonna be like, you know what? How dare other people be in charge of divinity? I think I could do better. And I'm going to.
Hell yeah.
So, great.
Okay.
So,
on that note, sign us off, Tree. Sign us out for the season.
No, hold on. Signing out is important, but we also need to formally introduce the new GM and kind of set up the next season. because of course we will record session 0 in like 5 minutes, but I don't know when it'll come out. Maybe there'll be a gap
that
of
is
a week
fine.
or 2 months.
That is fine. Okay. So we can cut out the signing off, and instead, what I'm going to do is do the handover, and then I'll sign off. So this is the official announcement. I'm sure it'll come out on Twitter and so on. We're doing promo already, actually, with like designing materials. Second season will also be in Uduasha. It will follow on in terms of the timeline straight from this one. So it's very likely to occur like a few days after this finale, but we won't be following the Chakrabortis. I think they've earned their rest. And I think that to a large extent, the things that they are about to do now in Uduasha may not be the things that we should continue to observe them for. I think they deserve some privacy to deal with having eaten, destroyed, and otherwise consumed gods. Instead, we will be playing a little known sword school called the Rising Moon. Members of it, rather, having just lost their leader and their most elite warriors to some terrible outside force, we will be attempting to rebuild this school and also the pride of the Kethrisi refugees in Uduasha. And happy to say that Prince is going to be GMing this for us. I'm looking forward to it. I think Prince is an excellent GM. And funnily enough, so he was running a campaign that I was playing in earlier, and we have just decided that in that group I will be running. So we've just traded off, really. So yeah, Prince, tell us in 17 words or less which god we are going to be creating, but only in Swedish.
Wow, that's hard.
Yeah.
I was lined up to read the introduction I actually wrote for this, but that's not in Swedish. So
no, that's not in Swedish. You could try translating it.
How about we do it in the language that we're speaking?
In Hadrathi?
Yeah. Anyway, here is my actual pitch, which I will now read.
Yes.
Okay. 6 towers in Doskvol, 6 cities in Iruvia, 6 seasons in the Shattered Isles, and 6 days in the Emperor's Week. But there are only 5 key bearers. There is no 6th spire, forlorn and forgotten in the desert. There is no 6th bloodline, concealed among the poor and the homeless, its descendants unaware of their heritage, dwelling in the gutters. There is no 6th Badshah, and no 6th family to account for, and no one has ever heard of the House of Endings. Yet.
It's gonna happen, man. We're gonna do it. It. I am so hyped for this.
Mm-hmm. That's my pitch. We will play to find out what exactly it means.
Yes. A+.
Excellent.
And on that note, it seems that it is time for us to invite the House of Endings in. And so we will bid farewell to this campaign, A Candle Ablaze. It has been a pleasure and an honor playing with all of you, running for all of you, and I suspect it will be the same playing with you next season. I was going to say something like that I thought was going to be very cheesy, but luckily for me, I have now forgotten that. So instead, in the immortal words of Rodgers and Hammerstein, so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye.
And so blows out our brief candle. I named the disciples of the Ceaseless Temple thus, with both their given names and taken. Soumithri, called Tree. Zoheb, called Klow. Prince, Emma, and Aadiyat, called Soap. Intro music, Jalandhar by Kevin MacLeod. Outro music in Keeravani Ragam by Srinivas. Blades in the Dark by John Harper and Evil Hat Productions. Iruvian playbooks by Johnstone Metzger. Follow us at Desperate Attune on Twitter or email us at desperateattune@gmail.com. Support us at kofi.com/desperateattune.